Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Epilepsy Foundation's camp training for camp counselors for Camp Discovery and Camp Candlelight out of Washington, Arizona, and Oregon. My name is Allie Anderson. I am the Executive Director for the Epilepsy Foundation in Arizona. And my counterpart here, Kevin, will kick us off.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Kopis. I'm the Executive Director for the Washington and Arizona regions with camps in both of those states. So for this training, we're going to start by giving a little overview of the Epilepsy Foundation itself and some of the programs and services we offer. We'll talk about epilepsy itself, which will kind of lead us essentially into why we started the camp. And then we'll get into our camp specific vision, and then we'll dive into some of the details of what we expect out of our volunteers, how to deal with specific situations such as homesickness, how to handle seizures that happen at camp. And then finally, we'll talk about a little bit about risk management side of camp. And then after you've been through camp and we haven't scared you away, we'll talk about ways you can get involved with us with the foundation outside of camp. So the mission of the Epilepsy Foundation is to lead the fight to overcome the challenges of living with epilepsy and to accelerate therapies to stop seizures, find cures, and save lives. And you'll see kind of on the next slide here how we go about doing that. So you'll see our core programs and services here offered at the national and local levels. First and foremost, we're here 24/7. So we have a helpline available to essentially anyone, people with epilepsy, caregivers, medical community, or really anyone needing any kind of help or referral. We do a lot of that, referrals, to an expert in the area to help you or any specific needs you have. We also have an advocacy department that focuses on policy issues related to individuals with epilepsy, both old and young. You'll see at the teen level, we have a group of teenagers that go each year to Washington, D.C. to talk with legislators. And our advocacy team is working across the country with states to pass a law that would require school personnel to be trained on seizure first aid. On the resources end of things, I won't talk about every one of them, but you can find information about all of them on epilepsy.com. Camp is obviously a big one in Washington, Oregon, and Arizona. Camp is not offered in every state, so we're lucky to have it here. And then another important one to highlight, you'll see it's the last bullet point there is our seizure first aid certification, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But again, you can find more information on all of our programs and resources on epilepsy.com. Finally, all the things I just talked about wouldn't be possible without our annual fundraising events like our walks, our galas, and other signature events that we have. Okay, so seizure first aid certification. I mentioned this on the previous slide, but this is something all volunteers must go through. Even if you have epilepsy yourself or you have a child with it, I think you'll be amazed at how comprehensive it is. You'll learn how to recognize various types of seizures, how to respond to them. And while lots of kids that come to camp are controlled on medicine, there are some that have frequent seizures. So it's important that you're prepared. And then outside of camp, of course, if you encounter someone who has a seizure, you'll be ready, right? Because you've been through this training. So you'll see how, how prevalent epilepsy is kind of by the numbers by each state that you see at the bottom right-hand side of the slide there. All right, so speaking of prevalence, epilepsy is, one of the most common serious brain disorders in the world, believe it or not. The challenge, though, as you may know, is that epilepsy is very invisible. And I've often heard epilepsy described as kind of a hidden disability. It's important to know that epilepsy is no one's fault, and other children and teens with epilepsy find themselves feeling very isolated and misunderstood. So they I've heard stories of people getting teased and bullied, and that's part of essentially the reason why we started the camp, right? Kids at camp don't have to worry about any of that because everyone understands their situation. Some people with epilepsy even try to hide their disorder, often leading though to feelings of isolation, helplessness, or even depression. But again, that's what's so great about the camp, is all of those feelings can sort of be put aside for a few days, right? While the kids focus on having fun.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'm going to start sharing a little bit more about camp specifically. Our camp vision with the Epilepsy Foundation is that camps are created from us to provide a safe and secure camp experience for children and teens with epilepsy and related seizure disorders. Campers are going to gain a greater understanding of their own diagnosis and treatment, develop peer-to-peer support, increase independence, self-confidence, discover new skills and interests, and develop the skills they need to be leaders, advocates, and champions in their everyday lives. Our camp programs are made to promote not only principles that help them understand their own diagnosis and gain a greater independence and understanding for themselves, but also we use core youth development principles in our planning for camp because they are kids first. So we want to make sure that our programs are promoting those principles like gaining an understanding and independence, developing peer-to-peer support through connections and caring, making them foster a sense of community through community living, i.e. staying in cabins, and intentional programming, really planning out the way that our programs are put together so that they're learning something new. Discovering new skills and interests. What else can you do at camp besides learn archery, ride a horse, in some cases go hiking, do arts and crafts. We always want them to discover new things that they maybe thought they weren't able to do. Building leadership skills and advocacy skills. Sometimes that also comes with the volunteering pieces that we do, but really giving them some character building moments. And then providing them an opportunity to contribute back to camp in different ways. Kevin is going to chat a little bit more about working with campers with epilepsy.
All right. So we touched on this a little bit already when we talked about, kind of the stigma around epilepsy. But it's important to be sympathetic to the emotional aspects of a kid's diagnosis. Kids can be resistant to having to take medication, or having this, quote, disease. One of the most important roles at camp is to let kids know that they're not alone. And if you have epilepsy yourself, share your story with the kids and even the parents. The parents love hearing about your own individual journey with it. It means a lot to some of them, the kids, to see that you've been successful in life despite your diagnosis. One quick story that we want to read, you'll see down there at bottom left, is a camper was writing about their summer vacation, and the mom encouraged the kid to write about camp and how great it was to be able to be with other people with epilepsy and talk about their diagnosis. Camper looked at the mom and explained, "Mom, that isn't why I like camp." So the mom asked, "Well, why do you like camp?" And the camper replied, "Because I don't have to talk about it." And you can go to the next slide, Allie.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, we like to foster a community for sure, and a culture where we give the campers the ability to chat and talk about their epilepsy and provide those opportunities to do so, but not force them to, because camp is made for them to be and feel like they aren't alone and not feel like they have to explain that they have epilepsy, where they might have to do those kind of things at school or in friend groups or anything like that. They might have to explain something. And camp is a great place because they don't have to explain anything. We already know. So it gives them that opportunity to be a camper first and a kid's first. So I'm I'm going to chat a little bit about working with campers in general, because we are kids first camp in how we work. So you'll see on here some tips and tricks to working with campers, but making sure that you're watching out for campers who have additional special needs, i.e. are they homesick? Are they not really eating very well? Do they need extra care in some way? If you do have that, you can always reach out to the camp director or the nursing medical staff. They're always happy to help with some of those things. Make sure that all campers are having a good time. Sounds pretty simple, but that can be a hard part for you if you're having a rough time with a camper or something like that. But just making sure that everyone's having a good time and seeing what that looks like for them. Camper hygiene, kids are not always the best at showering sometimes. So just making sure that campers are brushing their teeth, showering at least occasionally. I've had a couple of times where parents have told me that they labeled all of the kids' clothing and put them in Ziploc bags, said this is Monday, this is Tuesday, and they came home with every single outfit still in the Ziploc bag because they wore the same outfit the whole week. So just make sure that you're being aware of your camper's hygiene. Making sure that you're getting up on time, following the schedule, helping the campers start their morning, getting medications, doing that. Staying in the cabin with the cabin before bedtime and during bedtime to help enforce the lights out and quiet rule, because lack of sleep can obviously trigger a seizure for some campers and some volunteers. I know it can be really hard, especially if you've been coming to camp for a while and you have a lot of good friends or anything like that, but try to make sure that you're going to bed on time with your campers so that you are able to show up for them in the way that they deserve the next day as well. Never leave campers unsupervised. You should know where they are at all times, regardless of their age or maturity. So if you're with teenagers, you should still know where they are. Let's see, helping to entertain campers if there's free time. If something is taking a little extra time to set up, or if it's a longer walk, coming up with really cool ideas. There's trail games you can play, there's different songs you can sing, but just helping to entertain campers if they're waiting for a meal or something like that, just helping to take charge of that for us. Really get to know your cabin from the beginning. Get names, talk to them, learn about what they like, what they don't like, if they have any fears of being at camp, so that you can help address that throughout the time. And just help them feel comfortable being away from home. But at the end of the day, in that bottom right-hand corner, it's the number one thing. If you don't know how to handle a problem, if you need help, there's never any shame asking for help. We always want you to ask questions. If you don't know where to go, you don't know the answers, you don't get in trouble for asking questions. So just reach out to your camp director if you have anything that we can help walk you through how to handle any situation. Homesickness. A lot of people, this is your first question, right? What do we do with a homesick camper? We essentially want to train you to recognize the symptoms associated with being homesick, efforts, and kind of teach you what efforts are made to console and like what our policies are. So our policies at camp are basically, we don't encourage the campers to call home or talk to their parents away, that if their parents are not at camp. We don't encourage them to call home, typically because if you think about it, if a camper is hysterical and having a rough time, it probably sometimes makes it worse talking to parents. That doesn't mean that we aren't in communication with the parents. And homesickness is kind of like a roller coaster. So if the camper is miserable for 12 hours straight, absolutely, we're probably going to have that conversation with their parents and just say, hey, you know, little Timmy is really miserable right now. Is there anything we can do? And that might lead to talking to parents, but ultimately, if they're just having trouble at night or at a mealtime, but they're really having fun during the day, that's not necessarily a reason that they need to call home. If a camper is still homesick after 48 hours or 2 nights, and then reasonable efforts have been made or exhausted, the parents might be contacted to pick up the camper. Essentially, if they're ruining their own experience and other people's experience because of their homesickness, that's typically a time where we say, well, maybe this year just wasn't the best fit for that camper, and they can always come back and try again. We don't give refunds for campers who are homesick, and we don't provide any transportation home for homesick campers. So tips for dealing with homesickness, what to do if you have a homesick camper. Make sure you're welcoming them and integrating them. Introduce campers to another with games. Help create a sense of community in your cabin by allowing them to create bunk signs or customize their own bed somehow. I always encourage parents to send something that makes their bed feel really homey, whether that's a stuffed animal or it's a specific blanket they have or their pillow, something like that to make it feel like they're going to their bed and that it's not new or cold if that's a piece for them. Make sure that you're involving campers and understanding what the schedule looks like that day. Have discussions on homesickness the first day. Find out who has been away from home and who hasn't. Definitely help them normalize those feelings. Talk about what would help, what wouldn't. Help make a plan with them. I had a camper in the past who would get homesick. It got to a point, she was so mature, but she got homesick and she would come up to me and say, I'm feeling pretty homesick today. And I'd say, okay, you want to come spend the day with me instead of being with your cabin? And they would say, yeah, that sounds great. And within an hour, she was like, cool, this is boring. Can I go back to my cabin? And she was fine after that. So there's always different things that you can do in working with your camp director to make a plan for helping with homesickness. My personal story is that when I was in 8th grade, I went away to camp. I cried 4 out of 5 days. I had a professional photo of my mother that I just sobbed over. I wouldn't eat. They had meetings about me that I found out later. And literally one day, it all changed for me because the head counselor hung out with me one afternoon. She was their last resort and it worked. Just making sure that you're providing the space and the time for campers that just might need a little extra love, if you will. Remind campers it's okay and it's natural to be homesick. Help to kind of teach them coping mechanisms and help them relax. And you should relax because helping a camper overcome homesickness is definitely a team effort. So when you need help, make sure that you ask for it. Some other volunteer policies. So we covered how we focus on homesickness, but what are some other policies that we have? So one of the things that you signed in applying for Camp Discovery or Camp Candlelight was our volunteer expectation agreement. If you want to read it verbatim, go back into your application. You can log back into your account and review it, or reach out to your camp director, either Kevin or I, and we'll be happy to provide you with the actual wording of what you signed. But just a few things to highlight on the volunteer expectation agreement. It's important that you do know and understand what you've agreed to do and what our policies are. So one that I want to highlight is that the volunteer, once you arrive, will remain on campgrounds, except for scheduled Epilepsy Foundation camp activities, emergencies, or as directed by the camp director themselves. This is a liability issue and it has to do with our insurance. So once you're on campgrounds, plan to stay there. We also ask that you participate in our assigned activities. If you aren't having fun or if you aren't participating for any reason, it kind of gives campers the ability to say that they don't want to do it either. So we just want to make sure that you're engaged, you're having fun too, because that really trickles down to the campers and creates an amazing camp culture. Another piece is that obviously abiding by our safety and behavior guidelines, and that any directions that you're given by the camp director and staff, that you'll follow them. Another piece that I just want to highlight is that you signed a piece that said volunteer will accept that responsible behavior at camp also includes no possession or use of alcohol, marijuana products, CBD oil, illegal drugs or weapons before, during, or after the camp experience while on camp grounds. What you do in your personal life, not necessarily our business, but we're talking about on campgrounds. Failure to comply can result in immediate dismissal from camp. All medications, prescription and non-prescriptions, need to be kept in the medical station and designated location and be under the control of the Epilepsy Foundation staff or medical team. That includes Advil, birth control, everything. Again, that's a liability piece, but also, you know, if you're in a cabin with campers or there's campers nearby and you have it in your backpack, whatever that looks like, and they have the ability to get into it, that just can be really scary for everybody. There is a potential for exemption made by the camp directors or medical staff for doctor prescribed CBD products for seizure control. So if you have questions about whether or not yours or a camper that you know is taking this falls under that, just let Kevin or I know. This also includes that we don't allow the use of tobacco or electronic cigarettes during camp program at all. We ask that whichever camp you're going to, that you're abiding by the policy on technology and cell phone usage, which might differ a little bit per camp, but ultimately just don't be on your phone all the time because we're there to be for the campers for sure, first and foremost. Not entering a lodging area that is not your own without permission from the camp director or others. So no joining other cabins unless permission has been given. Expect to follow the rule of three. The rule of three is essentially a way that you are protecting yourself by not ever being alone with a camper. You should be with campers with a witness at all times, preferably another adult, but at many times during camp, it'll probably be another camper just because of how that works. Now, if you're walking through camp in the middle of daylight and everyone is around, yes, sometimes that's okay to have a one-on-one moment because everyone is around, they're seeing you, or they're pulling you off to the side. But ultimately, when in doubt, just keep the rule of three in your head. And we'll cover more about that in some of the ACA trainings that you're going to take after this. And last but not least, our social networking policy. You also signed a social networking policy when you applied for camp and signed some of the waivers. Ultimately, what this says is just don't be a jerk when it comes to posting things online and being really cautious about what your online presence looks like. Don't be posting defamatory comments about campers, other staff members, the Epilepsy Foundation in general, not harassing anybody. Don't use confidential information. So in this case, just so you know, confidential information does include the fact that campers are at this camp. That is a HIPAA violation by essentially if you post a picture with a camper and say that that camper has epilepsy, that is identifying them and their medical condition. So any of your posts cannot contain the full name, diagnosis, medications, home address, or hometown of any minor, even if the permission is given. That includes 17-year-olds. So ultimately, you shouldn't be posting photos with campers on your personal account. Now, I know a lot of you have probably been going to camp for a while and say, oh my gosh, I post photos all the time with my campers because I love them and this and that. I have a loophole for you. The Epilepsy Foundation has the everyone sign a photo waiver, and we will post photos, and you are welcome to share the photos that we post. So if you have a great photo of you in your cabin that you just really want to be able to post, feel free to share that from the Epilepsy Foundation, Oregon, Washington, or Arizona Facebook, or Instagram, wherever those are posted. If you have questions about that, let us know, but ultimately we don't allow for the posting of minors, and then no reaching out to campers online after camp either. Next, we have our transportation policies. As I mentioned in the expectation agreement, when it comes to being on camp, stay on camp. So that means not transporting campers off camp, not transporting yourself off camp unless there's an emergency and it's been cleared with the Epilepsy Foundation staff member. Typically, Transporting participants or campers or other volunteers is okay, but only when really adhering to like what we have outlined. So if you have questions about this, again, just reach out to a camp director. Offsite transportation, if we are going offsite somewhere for any reason, the Epilepsy Foundation will hire a professional company to do that. So there should never be a point where we're going to say, okay, everybody get in a volunteer's car and we're going down to the lake down the street. That would never happen. On-site transportation, Epilepsy Foundation staff or camp facility staff can transport participant in standard camp-owned vehicles. That's like if you're at a camp that has a camp van that transports you on site to horses or whatever like that may be. That's an example of allowing for on-site transportation. But again, that's probably only the staff or the facility staff. Another version of on-site transportation is going to be golf carts. If your camp has golf carts, the Epilepsy Foundation staff have appointed or will appoint volunteers that are allowed to drive campers in the golf carts on an as-needed basis only. Camp directors will appoint these people who are able to drive during the camp program. If you have not been given that permission, then you should not be driving a golf cart and you should not be driving a camper in that golf cart. Typically, this is going to go for medical transportation only. Medically necessary non-emergency off-site transportation includes anything that a camper might need to go see an urgent care or a physician or something like that, but it isn't necessary to call an ambulance for that. So medically necessary non-emergency off-site transportation, typically, again, that's going to be appointed by the camp staff. So that would be like if a nurse needs to go off-site with a camper for checking on something, but typically that is never going to be you as well. All right, Kevin is going to talk about radios and walkie-talkie policies.
All right, so we do provide radios or walkie-talkies for communication amongst our volunteer staff and with facility employees. Radios are given out based on availability and at the discretion of the camp director or Epilepsy Foundation staff. So every medical staff member will have a radio on them 24 hours. The camp director will have one, lead volunteers will have one, and then we typically have like one radio per cabin, which means not everyone will have a radio. Since most camps have multiple volunteers in a cabin, just one radio kind of per cabin. It's important when you're in possession of the radio, you are familiar with the name of your cabin, as you know, medical staff will sometimes ask for that. The names of the campers in your cabin. Most camps will have a second pair of batteries that you can swap out overnight and each morning to allow for that battery to charge kind of overnight. Radios are used for camp communication needs only and are to not to be given to campers. Go to the next slide. And this is just kind of the second slide here on radios. As I mentioned, each cabin will be given one radio. But if you're in a situation where the cabin needs to split, you know, for some reason, saying go to the nurses or going to a meal and some aren't ready yet, or there's a medical emergency or something, the radio will stay with the volunteer and campers in the cabin, and the volunteer leading the cabin will use the radio to let the destination, let the destination know they are on their way. But you never be in a situation where a person with the radio isn't close by. That's the most important thing. Okay, seizure reporting. So no fun to have a seizure, right? It's an embarrassing event. We do take tonic-clonic seizures very seriously. So if you are one of, if one of your campers or even a volunteer, because we do have volunteers with epilepsy, has a tonic-clonic seizure, or if you witness one occurring in the water, we ask that you immediately radio for help. Radio to the medical team. prior to camp, you will have taken the seizure first aid course. So, you can go and begin following the protocol until medical help arrives. Do note that the medical team will ask you for the name of the camper having the seizure. And the reason is because some kids have rescue medicine and some kids don't. But if they have rescue medicine, the team will need to bring that with them when they come and find you. Outside of that, we do try and keep the seizures, kind of as private and confidential as possible. As you know, it's just no fun to have a seizure. So we do try and keep it, as confidential as possible. The kids in your cabin will be concerned that their fellow cabin, mate is having a seizure, but please use good judgment. Be respectful of that kid's privacy. Now, if a camper or volunteer has any other type of seizure, and they're able to resume normal activity, please just note the time, the location, and maybe the symptoms of the seizure, and then just report it to the medical staff the next time you see them. No need to radio for help for those. Again, that's part of like trying to keep it as low key as we can. If it's manageable, they come back and they're alert. There's no need to radio for help. That being said, if you're ever unsure about something doesn't look right, just call the medical team. That's what they're there for. They're here to help you. They're the trained professionals, and there to help. So last thing, we want to do is put you in an uncomfortable situation. So again, when in doubt, just radio.
Awesome, thanks. I'm going to talk about, speaking of, the fun stuff, I guess, risk management. Ultimately, we're going to talk a little bit about risk management, what it means, especially because we are at a camp that has campers and volunteers with health needs. So there is risk that comes with that. So what we as camp directors do, and we want to instill in you, is what risk management is and how we think about what to do when something happens and how we prevent issues occurring in the future. So the definition of risk management is that basically proactively identifying and assessing and controlling risks before it occurs. So trying to stop any issues before they occur. Our goal of risk management is to identify potential risks, assess whether or not the risk is worth taking, and if it is, and implementing steps to minimize the potential for loss. Essentially making sure that if the risk is worth taking, so for example, ropes courses or riding horses, there's a lot of risk that comes with that, right? But of course it's worth taking because it's a great experience for our campers. But what do we do to make sure that horseback riding is safe, right? We make sure campers are wearing helmets. We offer ride-alongs, like somebody to walk alongside of the horse if the camper is worried about having a seizure or whatever that looks like. So we put things in place to minimize the potential for a camper to get injured or have an issue on horseback, if makes sense as a good example. Archery is another good one where we don't just like hand arrows to kids and let them sit behind the line, like, playing swords and using their bows. No, they have to step up to the line. There's goal setting. There's rules on how we safely shoot the arrow and those kind of things. That's example of how we identify potential risks and implement stuff to move forward and make sure that we're minimizing the potential for any issues to occur. So what happens if something does occur? What happens if, someone accidentally gets hurt from what we've been doing? So any accident or injury, this also includes behavioral. So if there's a fight that breaks out, that might be more verbal, or if there's something that behavioral happens, this is included in this. So but any accident or injury that requires medical attention, so basic first aid, a visit to the medical station, anything that essentially it requires the completion of an incident report form. So you'll see over here on the left-hand side is our medical form. The medical form is is only filled out by our medical staff, which is great. You don't have to worry about those pieces. They might ask you questions, because I do believe on here is like, where did it happen? What did it look like? Those kind of things, if they weren't witnessing it themselves. But the medical forms are filled out by our medical staff. This helps us because if even like a bee sting, or if the kid doesn't know that they're allergic, and it could potentially pop up later, or if it's something that honestly that they could come back and say, hey, this happened and my kid is still having issues and they want to sue us, we have these kind of things on file. Is that the other document right here is our witness statement. A witness statement is for anyone who actually witnesses an incident. So again, this can be physical or behavioral. Camper fights, camper insubordination, which just means they're being jerks and talking back a little too much, or if it's like a really intense conversation. Obviously, if they're like, I don't want to do this, that's fine. You don't need to write in a witness or statement for that. But what is included in here is potentially campers' discussion or talks of self-harm, or suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideations. Those are things that a witness statement would be filled out by probably you, and not necessarily the medical staff. These two documents are internal documents. We do not share them outside of the organization in any way, shape, or form. It's not that we're keeping them secrets. We still will, of course, tell the parents if any of these issues occur, especially like a serious injury, like broken bone or anything like that. We will absolutely share that information with them. If a camper has self-harm or suicidal thoughts, we work through that process as well with parents if it's safe to do so. Child abuse prevention is a little bit different. We'll talk about that on the next slide, but we will always communicate with parents as issues arrive, but we do not share these statements with them. We also don't like to refer to these statements when talking to parents, because they are just internal documentation for us and our insurance company. We don't want parents to worry and think that we filled out a report on their child and their child's a problem child and it's in their permanent record or whatever that looks like. That's not what this is. These are for us to be able to make sure that we can revisit any issues that occurred after camp if there is something that comes up after camp. When in doubt, fill it out is kind of how our policy tends to be with this. But if you have questions on whether or not you need to, just ask the camp director or the medical staff and we'll help guide you through it. Mandated reporting. One of the things that you will take, one of the trainings you will take is specifically towards mandated reporting. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I am going to talk about it in terms of the Epilepsy Foundation and the policies we have as you're a volunteer of the Epilepsy Foundation. Mandated reporting is that as a part of our medical team, as a part of our volunteer team in general, what I say is we are all mandated reporters. Kevin and I are mandated reporters because we oversee a camp for kids. A mandated reporter is a person who is required by law to report reasonable suspicions of abuse. The professionals who are required do vary by state, but as a volunteer at the Epilepsy Foundation, you are mandated reporters also. And what that means for us is you are mandated to and required to report suspicions of abuse or self-harm to the camp director, who will work with you and the medical team to report the appropriate state agency as needed. So this is not for you to call CPS. You will not need to disclose anything to parents at pickup. We ask that you don't do any of those things. You are to work with the camp director who will help guide the process from there. Camp volunteers should never communicate camper issues with parents. All issues need to be reported to the medical staff and the camp director or Epilepsy Foundation staff, who will then communicate with the parents as needed. Report up and don't discuss the issues that you've heard or gossip about other camper incidents amongst your peers. So don't go sharing with the other cabin and say, oh my gosh, so-and-so just told me that she cuts because she's so depressed about her epilepsy. It's not appropriate, and we don't allow that. So please make sure that you're communicating up to a camp director, a head counselor, whatever that looks like. And if you need to know anything, if you're worried because you think that, you know, if you're somebody who heard through the grapevine that so-and-so disclosed this and you're worried, I promise you, if you need to know anything, we will let you know. And if you don't need to know it, you probably will not be told by any of us. So.
Okay, so I think we're almost done here. As you probably know, we are a nonprofit, and as such, we rely pretty heavily on fundraising events to allow programs, specifically camp, and other services we offer to remain available to individuals and families. So the Walk to End Epilepsy happens nationwide. You can go to walktoendepilepsy.org and search by location to find kind of the walk nearest you. Arizona, Oregon, and Washington chapters also host various, other fundraising events throughout the year, such as golf events, galas, etc. And of course, we'd love to have your involvement in those. And it's also another way to volunteer with us. So if you're interested in getting involved in one of those, just contact your local office, Allie or myself, and we'll get you going.
So thank you for bearing with us for a little less than an hour here. Thank you. Just make sure, so you're viewing this training right now on the American Camping Association's training page for us. So thank you for doing that. Make sure that you do complete the rest of the trainings that are listed on this page for you. That includes the Redwoods camp safety trainings, mandated reporting training, our training called Camp is for Campers. And then, as Kevin mentioned before, you're also required to complete seizure first aid and recognition training at learn.epilepsy.com. Those trainings do last 2 years. So if you have previously taken it this year and you're still active by the time camp has come around, instead of taking that, you're welcome to just send us your certificate that shows that you're still up to date on that. And then some camps may have additional requirement or a waiver to be signed based off of the facility itself. So just follow up with your staff member to make sure that you're filling out everything you might need, or of course, reach out if you have any questions. You'll also have to complete a background check. So some of those information and details will also be coming your way. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we can't wait to see you at camp.